Okay, welcome to Mr. Media. We have it's a great honor that I met for the first time Stanton Friedman. He's a UFO researcher. He has been on many occasions in documentaries, UFO documentaries, give lectures, over 600 in Canada and in the United States, also in other countries. I find him very courageous. He has high degrees in physics, nuclear physics. It's a long list what he has done, and it's a great honor to interview him, not only about UFOs, are they real, but we're going to talk about the political side, intelligence community, what is their role, and what do we know about intelligence community? What is about the Freedom of Information Act, and what is that? Okay, Stanton, nice having you here in Holland.
Pleasure to be here for the first time and to speak in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
You want answers to all the questions you just raised, I suppose.
No, I want
in
first
2 minutes each.
First I want to know is, we know that UFOs are covered up. That's not the discussion yet now. The reason is, why is it covered up? And I have some opinions, you have some research done.
Well, okay. I worked under security for 14 years, so I understand how security works. I've been to 15 archives, spending weeks digging out documents.
And what was your work exactly?
I was a nuclear physicist for General Electric, Westinghouse, General Motors, TRW Systems, McDonnell Douglas, working only on far-out advanced nuclear and space system development programs. Things like nuclear airplanes, we did operate jet engines on nuclear power. Fission rockets, we did operate rocket engines this big with power of 4,000 megawatts. Working on nuclear power plants for space.
So you had a high clearance you had?
I had a Q clearance for all those years. Yeah, I understand security. I wrote classified documents. I stored them at work, of course.
Yes.
And so security is part of the picture for me. Yes. Now, in terms of Freedom of Information Act, one of the things I've found is that many people outside the United States and even in the U.S. think that that is the key that opens all the doors. All you have to do is ask and you shall be given, to use the biblical expression. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Mm-hmm. For every agency, there's a list of exclusions from access via freedom of information, mm-hmm. typically a full page of small print. Most significant, of course, is national security. So I can tell you the story, if you want, proving that there's a cover-up. Well, this is what you get under freedom of information. This is an affidavit from the National Security Agency, mm-hmm. justifying to a federal court judge the withholding of 156 National Security Agency UFO documents. And we had to go to court and all this sort of thing. We didn't get to see the original document. This is the justification. The judge got to see none of those documents.
But first of all, the NSA told the people that they was not involved with the UFOs.
They never said anything. The NSA stands for never says anything, no such agents.
No, what I meant is, in the beginning, asking documents on UFOs was very difficult because they say we never done something with UFOs.
Well, okay,
in the very beginning.
The story actually began with the CIA, everybody's favorite target. We went after the CIA, a group called Citizens Against UFO Secrecy.
Yes, I know that.
We want all your UFO information. We don't have any UFO information. You do too. We do not. We appeal. They deny. We go to court. Judge says, do a search. They come back to court. They had found 900 pages of UFO stuff, but nothing above secret. There was confidential. There should have been top secret, and top secret compartmentalized. Mm-hmm. They gave us also a list of 57 documents originating from half a dozen other agencies, which they couldn't release. We'd have to go to those agencies. Everybody was collecting data on flying saucers: the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, State Department, Defense Intelligence Agency, and 18 documents from the NSA, UFO documents. We filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the NSA. We want these 18 documents as listed by the CIA. They said, under executive order, thus and such, they take a page and say, we can't give you anything. We are prohibited from giving out any information about sources and methods related to intelligence. We say, we don't want sources and methods information, just the UFO information. We can't give you anything. Go away. We appeal. They deny. We go to court. The judge says, do a search. This is what you have to do. And it costs money to go to federal court.
And how long will it take?
Well, it took at least well over a year.
A year?
Yeah, well over a year. And then they come back to court, And the judge says, what did you find? We knew about 18 UFO documents. Not a big deal. 239 UFO documents, Your Honor. 239. But 79 originate with other agencies, 23 from the CIA, which didn't find them when it did its court-ordered search, mind you.
Yes.
That leaves 160 NSA UFO documents. They threw out 4. They said, well, they're not really relevant. Fine, we'll take 156. They said, you can't have anything, national security, go away. We're going around in circles, so we try a legal ploy. We ask if they supply the documents to the judge, federal court judge Gerhard Giselle, so that he can determine whether they are properly invoking national security. It can't be to save embarrassment. That's not a good reason. They refused to show him any of those documents on grounds of national security, but they gave him a very high-level security clearance so they could provide him with this affidavit. He was so impressed with the affidavit, he saw a clean document. Our lawyer didn't get to see anything, you understand?
No.
That he found for them, they should not release these documents, even though he never saw any of them, only the justification. He said the public interest in disclosure is far outweighed by the potential danger to the security of the United States should this information be released. National security and flying saucers. We went to the Federal Court of Appeals.
Yes.
The next step up. They normally take 2 months to reach a decision. It's a 3-judge tribunal. I was there for the oral arguments, oral and written and so forth. 5 days after seeing the same affidavit, they agreed with the lower court. Supreme Court wouldn't hear the case. That's when we filed for the affidavit, and when we get it, it's 75% blacked out. Now, I also filed for the CIA documents, and after 35 months, they gave me 9. They were press abstracts of Eastern European newspaper articles about flying saucers, which the Russians had the day they were published. Their own 14 documents they withheld. I appealed 2 years after that, a total of 5 years, to get portions of 3 documents. On 2 of the pages you can read 8 words. Everything else is blacked out. So there's no question that agencies of the federal government of the United States are withholding information on flying saucers, UFOs. And I have challenged one of the debunkers, Mr. Philip Klass, who says you can't keep secrets from the Washington Press Corps.
He's been often in a LA King show. Yeah.
Yes. He says you can't keep secrets from the Washington Press Corps. For 10 years, I've been asking for a clean copy of this document instead of 75% blacked out like that.
And this is on ground of national security.
Exactly right.
How on earth can something against national security when you say in the Cannon report, they say there's no threat at all from this...
the Air Force has consistently said that, except they've been very careful about how they say it, and the press has been stupid enough to fall for their misleading statements. When the Blue Book was closed, they said no UFO report evaluated, investigated, and there's a third word, judged by the United States Air Force gives any evidence of being a threat to the security of the United States. Now, if you look at that carefully, if any one of the 3 functions were done by somebody else, the CIA, the DIA, the NSA, anybody else, then it would still be a true but totally meaningless statement. Beyond that, the penguins in Antarctica aren't a threat to the security of the United States. They're certainly real. So they've asked the wrong question, and the media have fallen for it.
Yes.
The Washington Post and the New York Times have been strongly anti-UFO. They've done no investigation. I have challenged the media.
Armchair critics.
Yeah. If any of the major media, whether it's NBC or CBS or the Washington Post, New York Times, LA Times, would spend the same amount of effort that the Washington Post put into blowing the lid off the political Watergate, going after the cosmic Watergate, they would succeed.
Yes.
But none of them have guts enough to do that so far. So I'm an optimist. Maybe soon.
And how many documents, official documents, you have now in your possession, total now? And we live now in 1996.
Government documents.
July.
Well, between all the groups that have gone after documents, we have
Total.
probably about 6,000 pages. 2,000 came from the FBI alone.
Yes.
Released to Dr. Bruce Maccabee, an optical physicist.
Is this also on your CD-ROM, the documents? This one?
Some of them. I didn't put a lot of documents on there. We talked about them. I held up these. I held up the CIA documents.
And if you want to see the documents, is also one of the documents in one of those here?
Well, yeah, the Majestic 12 documents, which are the most important government documents ever released about UFOs, they're in here.
Mm-hmm.
But this is my detailed investigation.
Mm-hmm.
This is the group that was established by President Truman in 1947 to deal with Roswell, crash saucers, alien bodies, technology, research, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And we got some documents in 1984. The question is whether they're legitimate or not.
You have leaked out documents, and you have confirming documents that MJ12 exists and so forth.
We sort of have that. There are people who say it's all a fraud.
I know, yeah.
There are some new documents in my new book, which have not previously been published.
And confirming that MJ12 exists.
They certainly seem to confirm. And I have a long list of reasons why I think the documents are genuine. But, excuse me, I've been to 15 archives.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the armchair theorists don't go to any archives.
No.
This document's different from this document, so it must be a fraud. Well, when you go to the archives, you find there are many different formats. The date format is wrong.
And the numbering also is mentioned.
Well, yeah, I've at one file folder
Mm-hmm.
for the Office of the Secretary of Defense from the 50s, which is what we're talking about here.
Yes.
There were 7 different date formats.
Mm-hmm.
So which is right, which is correct, you know? And when you find there is a strong movement by people, a sort of not invented here movement.
Mm-hmm.
These documents can't be real because they weren't sent to me,
Mm-hmm.
is the attitude. No, they weren't sent to me either. But Jamie Chandray, the first guy to receive it, Carl Sagan attacks these in his new book, Demon Haunted World.
Mm-hmm.
Why would they be sent to a television producer? What he doesn't tell you is that television producer, Jamie Chandray, and William Moore, with whom I worked on the Roswell incident, were the original investigators.
Yes, I know him, yeah.
They were in touch with military insiders, intelligence community insiders, for 3 years by that time.
Mm-hmm.
He had been to Albuquerque, he'd met with these people. Of course they were sent to him and not to somebody who's off somewhere who doesn't know anything about the subject.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who isn't trusted or known to the intelligence agency people that would send out such things. So the documents end of thing takes an awful lot of effort. My trying to get the CIA stuff took 5 years, and you wind up with nothing very useful. If you want to go to court, it costs a lot of money because it's federal court. But we can do a lot of investigations, and when we do that, I think we conclude, as I did in this, and it sort of illustrates the problem. Not only do we have documents in here, but I have a copy of Philip Glass's check to me
Yes.
for $1,000 for proving him wrong about the typeface on one of the documents. Now, it sounds esoteric, and maybe it is, but it illustrates the problem with the debunkers. Mm-hmm. Phil challenged me, perhaps you didn't notice that this memo from Robert Cutler, Ike's National Security Advisor, to General Nathan Twining, at the time Chief of Staff of the Air Force, perhaps you didn't notice that it was done in a large pica type, but the tradition at the White House, he said,
Mm-hmm.
was a small elite type, and he had 9 documents to prove it. And he challenged me to find any genuine documents from the National Security Council, that time frame, done in the same size and style type. And he offered me $100 each for every genuine such document found, up to a limit of 10, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I dug out 20 right away. The funny thing is he'd never been to the Eisenhower Library, of course.
No.
I spent weeks there. I dug out 20, then 14, and then 7, and I sent him an invoice for $1,000, and he paid the bill. But here's the crazy thing. How could anybody think that if you've got 9 documents out of 250,000 NSC documents at the Eisenhower Library, that if you know that 9 are done in elite type, that all of them are? If you had 99 out of 100, sure, why not expect that the 100th is done in the same typewriter?
Yeah, sure.
But it typifies the intellectual bankruptcy of the pseudoscience of anti-ufology.
Yes.
It's nonsensical.
The noisy negativism.
Yeah, I attack the noisy negativists at any chance that I get, because somebody has to say, let's deal with reality.
Yes.
I mean, for example, with regard to Roswell, I got people saying, hey, it was just a paper, just an article in a small-town newspaper. You know, Roswell Army Airfield captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. Isn't that clever? And Larry King said to Whitley Strieber, If that were a real story, it'd have been in newspapers all over the country. Well, Whitley didn't know enough to say, gee, Larry, I'm so glad you brought that up, because here's the Chicago Daily News, not a small-town paper, same date, July 8th, 1947.
It's even in Holland has been
Well,
released.
here's the Spokane Chronicle, Army declares flying disc found. My favorite is this one from the Los Angeles Herald Express, not a small-town paper. Army finds flying saucer.
Yes.
Now this one has the cover story because there was only a window of opportunity. General believes it is radar weather gadget. Now, many people go look at the New York Times for July 8th, 1947. There's no story. Obviously, nothing was published. Mm-hmm. Total nonsense. They're not looking in the right place. They're not doing their homework. They're sitting at home in their armchair theorizing. I mean, sure, this is the next day's headline from the Roswell paper. General Ramey empties Roswell saucer.
Yes.
But unless you do your homework, you don't get the full picture at all.
But I've heard in a documentary that you were the first to track down the major, the important major, Jesse Marcel.
Well, yeah, there have been 4 different stories played in the media in the last couple of years about how the story came to light. And the Air Force really did itself proud. It said that in 1978, the National Enquirer, tabloid, carried an article saying that Major Jesse Marcel claimed that he had recovered the wreckage of a flying saucer at Roswell in 1947. Also in 1978, a UFO researcher, Stanton Friedman, now they can't call me a nuclear physicist, that would spoil the picture,
Yes, yeah.
interviewed Marcel and started looking for other witnesses. Well, it's nonsense. The National Enquirer interview appeared in 1980. By then, Bill Moore and I had talked to 60 people.
Yes.
Did I get my idea from the National Enquirer? Of
No.
course not. How did the story come to light?
But I think when somebody claims that you have from the National Enquirer, yeah, I think it's not about telling the truth. It's about what people will think. People in general think, okay, it's all.
They're tabloidizing the story, but
Yes.
the real story
That's the
also.
goal. That's the goal,
Well,
of course.
but even the pro-UFO groups, Channel 4 in England,
Uh-huh.
they said the story came to light when WWL, a television station in New Orleans, carried a story about Jesse Marcel. I was in that program. Mm-hmm. That's not how it came to light. Mm-hmm. I'd already done a movie, UFOs Are Real. He's interviewed in that in 1979.
Yes.
How it came to light, and I better add something else. People say, well, how come he came rushing to you with the story? Mm-hmm. He didn't. That's total nonsense. Mm-hmm. I was at a television station in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That night, I was due to speak at Louisiana State University, and I was scheduled to do 3 interviews at that station, 3 different programs. Mm-hmm. I'd done the first 2. The station manager was entertaining me, giving me coffee. We were waiting for the 3rd reporter, who was late, thank goodness. And he's embarrassed because he knows I've got a busy schedule. And out of the blue, he says, gee, you know, the guy you ought to talk to is Jesse Marcel.
Exactly, yeah.
And I say, who's he? Well, he handled pieces of one of those saucers you're interested in when he was in the military. Well, that got my attention, you know. Yeah. So I said, what do you know about him? We're old ham radio buddies, lives over in Houma, Louisiana. I had no idea where that was. I've been there since. Well, the reporter shows up. The next day I call Jesse. He was in the phone book. He tells me his story, doesn't remember a date. Late 40s, but, you know, it's 31 years later. This is 1978. I'm in Minnesota at a college. 2 people after my lecture tell me about a friend of theirs, Barney Barnett, who had stood next to a crashed flying saucer with bodies next to it. They didn't have a date. I shared that information with Bill Moore, who was living in Minnesota. He had a 3rd story. An English actor named Muey Green, still alive, talked to him recently, was driving across the United States, and he heard on the radio about this crashed saucer in New Mexico. When he got to Philadelphia, there was nothing. He thought there'd be a big fuss because there had already been 2 weeks of lots of sightings. We were able to find out a date, late June, early July. Bill Moore goes to the University of Minnesota Library, starts looking through the newspapers. There's the story. That gave us the name of the rancher. It gave us the name of the military people. It gave us the name of the public information office. So we pursued them.
It's like you investigate not only scientifically, but also like a private eye. It's like...
It's detective work.
Yeah, detective
and
work.
Sometimes you get lucky. I called the Roswell Daily Record. I look in the book. Oh, there is a newspaper there. I didn't know anything about Roswell. I've been there many times since. But
I think this scientific community should do the same thing.
Of course.
A little bit like detective work.
Yeah, do your investigation first. As Carl Sagan likes to say, that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. What he really should be saying is extraordinary claims require extraordinary investigation.
That's right.
I called the newspaper and I said, I'd like to talk to the editor from 1947, 30 years earlier, more than 30 years earlier. She said, oh, long gone, what do you need? I said, well, I've got this story that says the base public information officer, a guy named Walter Haught, before I could finish the sentence, she says, oh, his wife works here. I said, what? You don't expect a soldier to be in the same small town 30 years later where he had been stationed 30 years earlier. Well, that got me Walter. He had a base yearbook. That was a big help. So getting lucky. But then you go from A to B to C to D. E knows something. You go to F to G. And finding people is not easy in the United States. Many different area codes in the phone system. It's very hard to track people down because it's such a huge country.
But your lectures is a way to reach people and to get a feedback of the people.
Oh, yeah. And as I say, if I wasn't lecturing, I wouldn't have heard about Marcel, and I wouldn't have heard about Barney Barnett.
So there's always a good point to talk about it. But
I instigated the Unsolved Mysteries program about Roswell. When it was first shown in 1989, 28 million people saw the show.
Yes.
They have a toll-free telephone number. A lot of people called in.
Yeah.
It was shown again in January of 1990. More people called in. That's what led to my book, because we got new witnesses.
yes.
People don't know where to report. And incidentally, finding the newspaper articles after I talked to Major Marcel validated what he had said. It gave me an independent check on did he say anything that went beyond reality. Now, you're talking about playing detective, one other thing.
Yeah.
One of the people that appears in a photograph with General Roger Ramey, head of the 8th Air Force, which is where Marcel took the stuff in Texas.
Yeah.
Jesse Marcel was the intelligence officer for the 509th, the only atomic bombing group in the world. His boss was Colonel William Blanchard, Butch Blanchard, who went on to become a 4-star general at age 48 and vice chief of staff of the Air Force. Before he had a heart attack, he'd have been chief of staff. Anyway, Blanchard's boss at the time was General Ramey in Fort Worth, Texas. His chief of staff was Thomas Jefferson Dubose. Okay, there's a picture of the two of them with some of the wreckage, and they say it's a radar reflector from a weather balloon. So the question was, are these guys alive? Could I find them in the early 80s?
You found him?
I found General Dubose.
You interviewed him?
Interviewed him in his house and on tape, and we have a sworn statement by him. Now, this is a man from West Point, at 18,000 hours as a pilot, set up the Air Force's search and rescue team, retired as a general. This is a guy you cannot take lightly, what he says. And he told me that he took the call from Ramey's boss in Washington, head of the Strategic Air Command, mind you, telling him 3 things. 1, cover up the story. I don't care how you do it.
Yes.
2, send some of that wreckage up here with one of your Colonel Couriers today. 3, I don't want you ever to talk about it again, not even with your buddy Roger Ramey. That's an order. Do I need to put it in writing? No, sir. When a 3-star general tells a colonel what to do, he does it.
He does.
Now, I got that straight from Tommy Dubose, face to face, sitting as close as we are.
And you have filmed him making
He's been filmed making the statement. He has got a sworn statement signed off on.
Is it possible that you have it with you, or we can make
I have the
show it to
film
public?
with me, Recollections of Roswell, in PAL format, which we can arrange for you to get a copy
Because
of.
we
I'll
can
have
maybe show
tomorrow.
it to the public.
Yeah. I'll have it with me tomorrow, his pictures in the book. But when you're dealing with people like that, you see,
Then the picture comes clear.
yeah, you cannot say these are some kind of UFO nuts. Now, Major Marcel, he's been viciously attacked lately. The guy was the intelligence officer for the only atomic bombing group in the world. Hand-picked officer, took a high-level clearance. You cannot say, well, he was just some kind of UFO nothing, with but nothing better to do. That's nonsense.
There's also a movie made about this UFO
Well,
crash.
there are several movies which talk about Roswell. One is the movie Roswell, which was on television in the U.S., Showtime.
I've seen that, yeah.
2 of the pictures dealing with the supposed alien autopsy pretend to tell the story.
Exactly, and you have in our magazine Exposure, you explained that this is a lot of proof that this is disinformation.
There's a lot of garbage out there.
Yes.
So, don't accept anything. Check everything. I have a big gray basket not black, not white, maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
And I have made a habit of exposing frauds, for which I get attacked, but that's the price you pay. People like Robert Scott Lazar. It's a great story. Here's this young, courageous physicist talking about being hired to back engineer a flying saucer out at Area 51, this highly classified area. And he's got a master's in physics from MIT and another master's in electronics from Caltech. And he was a scientist at Los Alamos. It's a very fascinating story. The trouble is, he's got no degrees from anywhere. He finished in the bottom third of his high school class. He took a course in chemistry. He certainly didn't go to MIT or Caltech. He did go to Pierce Junior College. At the very same time when he was working on his master's at MIT, 2,500 miles away, which would be a neat trick indeed. If you can go to MIT, you don't go to Pierce Junior College. So I've dug into this, and yet people get mad at me. Well, he sounds very sincere. So does every con man in the world sound sincere?
That's right.
Sincerity is not a test of truth.
But let me one thing say. This guy who have manipulated a lot of people, of course, in the minds of people who say, hallelujah, this is the answer, this is the proof. And then you get, again, it will be disproved. So that it's all...
Well,
but I meant, it deserves not that attention what it gets now. We have to keep focus on what goes good, what is proof, what is real investigating worth. And if you have, I've seen the article of yours in our magazine Exposure, that you have a lot of points to say about, and if when people want to know more about this article, they can in contact with me.
Well,
but I want to say is this, we have to talk now to the public to not only to convince there is disinformation, but also to talk about encouraging people to do your own homework. And you have a lot of information like the CD-ROM. What can you say about this? Why should I have this one? Why?
Because it's got more information about flying saucers than you'd find in dozens of books. The CD-ROM capability, I'm incredulous. There's so much in that little disc, you know. It's got video interviews. It's got audio interviews. It's got an interactive multimedia. You can interview me on there. Pick your question, you get a different answer.
Oh, yeah? Yes,
oh, yeah.
Great.
It's got about the equivalent of 12 pages of references. It lists all the PhD theses that have been done, the large-scale scientific studies, many books by scientists. It's got pictures of UFOs. It's got animation. It talks about questions like, can you get here from there? It covers the waterfront, if you will, on flying saucers. And I've been involved in, I've published 70 papers about flying saucers. I've got several videos out there. But that has more information. And you can go through it a different way each time.
And it's more enjoyable to do.
Well, it's kind of fun, yeah. If you're doing a paper for class, you can go to that portion, you know, that you want to deal with. It's got interviews with abductees like Travis Walton and Betty Hill. They're right on there.
There's also a film, Travis Walton.
Oh, yes.
Case.
Yeah, and there's a new book out by Travis, incidentally, responding because of the movie, which brought up more attacks on him, and because the movie was grossly inaccurate about what happened on board the craft. The tone was right for the community and stuff. But it was like they decided to appeal to 14-year-olds who like horror movies while he was on board. So he's got a whole new book out, A Fire in the Sky, The Walton Experience. I'm right in the middle of it now, it just came out. And it's really dynamite in terms of dealing with some of the attacks on him by Phil Klass and others. It's amazing what lengths debunkers will go to. It's something you don't believe in, but they spend half a lifetime working on it, which is very strange.
I made also a joke about, when I give lectures as well about UFOs, I made sometimes a joke, like this for instance, I want your opinion what I say now. When somebody tells to me, yeah, UFOs, it's the same as goblins and elves.
Oh yeah.
Listen, this is what I say. Okay, if you think it's the same as goblins and elves, then I want to see goblins and elf sightings reported by policemen, pilots and military personnel, being photographed all over the world, documents, secret documents on goblins and elves. I think that's never done before with goblins. So there is, well, this is, when you understand this fact, why is it so that UFO is hard to understand? I think I have a good statement to make for everybody who wants to listen, is that, in my opinion, when a part of UFOs, or a tiny part or a big part, I don't know, from the real UFOs are extraterrestrials, it means it has a political, social, economic, military and religious impact. And there are 5 big, huge institutions who power structures who are not happy if this is true. So political, social, economic, military, and religious impact. And name me one subject who has so much resistance.
Well, I think what we also need to recognize is the tools of the debunker. There are 4 basic rules for debunking.
Debunking means discrediting the subject.
Yes.
In a way that is not nice.
Speaking bunk about things.
Yes, all right.
Nonsense. First rule is what the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. There are 11 anti-UFO books in the United States. Not one of them mentions the largest study ever done on flying saucers by the U.S.
14,
Air Force, Project Blue Book Special Report 14.
Yeah.
And yet all the authors were aware of it.
Yes.
What the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them.
3,201 yes,
Right.
cases and 21%
Unknowns.
announced, but
Completely separate from 10% insufficient information.
yes.
Quality evaluation shows the better the quality of the report, the more likely to be an unknown.
So that means that from 21% of 3,201 is a lot of cases.
Over 600. That
Also,
the Air Force admits it couldn't identify.
exactly, and the Air Force was also so skeptical with researching that when somebody talks about maybe seeing an alien, they say, okay, that's not in the report, it's not a UFO.
That's right.
And even the percentage should be higher.
Oh, there's no question about that. But, you know, it's funny, Phil Klass says that there are no sightings that don't have prosaic explanation. He never mentions. There are 11 anti-UFO books. None of them mention Blue Book Special Report 14.
And this was official.
Every one of them was aware of it. What the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. That's the first rule for debunkers, for skeptics, if you will. The second one is, don't bother me with the facts, my mind's made up. My college classmate Carl Sagan repeatedly has said, there are interesting UFO sightings that aren't reliable. There are reliable UFO sightings that aren't interesting, but there are no interesting, reliable sightings. It sounds very profound. If you look at Blue Book Special Report 14, they did a quality evaluation of all the sightings. The greater the reliability, the more likely to be an unknown. Exactly the opposite of what he said. Yes. The third rule for debunkers is, if you can't attack the data, attack the people. It's easier. Those are all kooks, quacks, nuts. That's the easy way out. Mm-hmm. And the fourth, finally, is don't do research by investigation. Do it by proclamation. It's easier, and nobody will know the difference anyway. So people need to look for the signs of proclamation. No background, no evidence presented. But just saying, all those people are nuts. There is no evidence. It's obviously a hoax. These are proclamations.
They're looking also only for plausible explanations. They're looking not for confrontational explanations. No, only plausible. And if it's plausible, then it's accepted by the scientific community. And
well, scientists don't knock the scientists. It's a popular myth that most scientists don't believe in UFOs. I've talked to 100 professional groups. The polls consistently show believers outnumber non-believers. 2/3 of those who express an opinion in scientific groups say they're real. Mm-hmm. And the greater the education, the more likely to believe they're real, according to Gallup polls for 30 years.
Yes, I know that.
But you repeat the myth often enough and people believe it, and what's important is people's actions are determined by their belief system. Mm-hmm. Will you report a UFO? Not if you think everybody's going to laugh at you. Will you sponsor a PhD candidate? Not if you think everybody's going to laugh at you.
I've heard that 9 out of 10 people who have seen a UFO said that I don't want to report it because of the consequences.
I check all my audiences, 700 lectures. Typically at the end, 10% believe they've seen one. How many of you reported it? 1 in 10 of those who...
And 9 in 10 doesn't want to.
No, because the laughter curtain is real.
The consequences.
So that's one of the things I'm trying to change with my lecturing, with my television appearances, all that. Make people aware they're not the only one who's had the experience, and it's okay.
How many do you think, when you give a lecture, how many percent take the effort on to check things out, to really go to the library, go to do some homework?
Very, very small. A lot of them buy my books and papers. That's good because they're loaded with references so they can justify it. But most people are willing to accept the views of an authority figure. I'm a scientist. He must know what he's talking about. This is good and it's bad because if you get people who are frauds, who claim to be scientists but aren't. One guy who claimed to be a jet pilot taking gun camera pictures, he was never in the Air Force, was not a pilot. I mean, when you get people who get accepted because other people say they seem sincere, that's when you have the problem. We should check on everything and everybody. Mm-hmm. And when I was challenged about Bob Lazar, I sent copies of my diplomas. I sent copies of my listings in Alumni Journal and membership in various technical societies and stuff. Lazar hasn't provided any of that, but nobody but me has asked him for it. So everybody who's concerned about this subject has to recognize that there's a solid body of evidence, and there's a lot of garbage.
I have to also say that you have a percentage of UFOs who are maybe governmental experiments. You have a percentage that can be maybe from the future. It can be, you have also an explanation that maybe it's from the past, like Atlantis. And then you have a lot of ideas what it could be. And then you have a problem when there's so many possibilities. Then a lot of people say, okay, it's all baloney. But if you say, what type of people drive a car? Is it only white people? No, you have also people who are colored drive cars. Well, so it's the same with UFOs. Maybe
if you want truth, you have to ask the right question. The question isn't what are UFOs? Are UFOs A, B, C, D, or E? The question that I'm asking,
yes,
there are many different ones. The question that I'm particularly focusing on, are any UFOs intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft? My answer is a very loud yes.
Yes, intelligent control, that's important.
Yeah. Now, if you want to ask me, are some UFOs government-sponsored project way back when, the U-2 or the SR-71 or the Aurora or whatever, a stealth aircraft? My answer is certainly, of course. But that isn't as exciting to me as intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. So I try to zero in on the right question, and people say, well, why are they coming here? I say, look, one of my papers is 26 different reasons. I don't speak for aliens. Maybe they're broadcasts of the weekly show, Idiocy in the Boondocks. Maybe they're graduate students doing their thesis work on the development of a primitive society. You know,
I think when you think about this, the moment that they have a crash source was 1947 in July, 2nd July or 8th July. And at that moment, we have also being testing nuclear bombs. I can imagine that when there is a higher civilization watching our Earth developing and reaching out for the stars in a possible future, they have to look in the backyard what we're doing and playing with our toys. And
I think it's fair to make one assumption about every advanced civilization, namely that it's concerned about its own survival and security. I think that's reasonable. Yeah. That being the case, you have to keep tabs on the primitives in the neighborhood, but only close tabs on those primitives who show signs of being able to bother you. At the end of World War II, there were 3 signs from our planet, nuclear weapons, V-2 rockets, powerful radar, that soon this primitive society, whose major activity obviously was tribal warfare, just look what we did, would be moving out, soon meaning less than 100 years, which on a cosmic timescale is nothing. I don't think it's any coincidence at all that the saucers that crashed in 1947 crashed in southeastern New Mexico, the only place in the entire world where you could study all 3 of those technologies. First nuclear weapon explosion above ground, Trinity Site, White Sands Missile Range. That's where the captured German V-2s were being fired, and that's where we had our best radar to track the rockets, because often they didn't go where they were supposed to go. You can say it's coincidence. I have trouble believing in coincidences.
And this crash UFO is also hit by a flash of light from the...
Well, I don't know whether it was a flash of lightning that caused a mid-air collision, whether they were running into a radar beam that we know was on, because there's supposed to be a launch at White Sands Missile Range, and they have to track the weather with radar reflectors.
And anti-gravity propulsion is sensitive to radar beams?
I didn't say anything about anti-gravity propulsion systems. I'm saying it's probably magneto-aerodynamic, at least the guidance system, maybe the propulsion system. And we know that the radar was on because they have to make tests 72, 48, 24, and 4 hours before launch. You let the radar sit there, vacuum tube radar, no solid state at that time. If 2 saucers come tootling along and suddenly run into this powerful beam, which isn't going like this, it's just steady, and it caused just a momentary discombobulation of the guidance system or the propulsion systems, you get whammo, a crash. One goes one way, one goes the other, this breaks up into pieces. This one's almost intact. That's what I think happened. I mean, that was a unique situation that they couldn't have found anyplace else, because there weren't people doing that.
They say that the crash sources is also being studied to duplicate it and to be for military purpose.
Of course.
The potential of
the key reason for any government to be concerned about flying saucers, there are 2. Are they a threat to our security? Are they going to attack next week, kind of thing? And how can we figure out the technology?
To duplicate it.
Yeah, that'd make wonderful weapons delivery and defense systems.
There's a good reason to cover it up.
Of course. Also, 1947, you could hardly tell the world, which was in a terrible mess. Marshall Plan was just starting. Millions of people starving here in Europe. You couldn't say, oh, we thought you'd like to know that there are these aliens traipsing through our airspace. We can't do a darn thing about it. We don't know why they're here. We don't know where they're from. We don't know how they operate. But we thought you'd like to know. That would have been totally irresponsible, considering the world as it was in 1947.
You first have to know what it is, what they want, what they do.
And then how can we glean new technology from it, and how can we keep our enemies from gleaning that technology?
Yes.
Remember that Klaus Fuchs's traitorous dissemination of nuclear weapons information advanced the Russian nuclear weapons program by 2 years, a spy. That made the U.S. government very sensitive about spies. That's why one of the people who went out with Major Marcel, the only person who went out with him, was a counterintelligence corps agency man, to make sure nobody else got their mitts on this stuff. Because one thing you learn very quickly, you can't tell your friends without telling your enemies. They watch television, they listen to the radio, newspaper. So the American people could not be told what was going on because it would tell everybody else. And that would be counterproductive from a national security technology viewpoint. That was then. I'm not saying the same grounds apply today. I think it takes courage to break through that cosmic Watergate. And not too many people in public life have the courage to move forward instead of saying, which way is the wind blowing? That's the way I'll go. Which way will get me elected? So it's time for a new era of courage before the end of the century. Maybe we can qualify for admission to what I call the cosmic kindergarten.
Yes.
We have to recognize that the future of the planet is tied in with space. That's the area we're going to exploit. We need the resources of asteroids. We need other places to colonize. But there's somebody out there already. We're not the bosses in the neighborhood. And I think it's important for us all to recognize what really comes out of all this is an earthling orientation. I mean, the internet links the whole planet, but this is much more powerful than that.
I think also that when you have a 3 years old child given matches, we know what's going to happen. It's not good. Maybe it's the same attitude of aliens, that they don't give their toys to instead. No. And now it's important, what I want, we have to close up the interview. For days I can talk with you. But there was one question what popped in my mind is that when you accept that aliens are here, my anxiety or my fear is that it is all one-sided. The media is one-sided in the approach of the type of alien that is presented. It's always large heads, big eyes, the greys they're called. And my fear is why so one-sided? Why not talking about other type of aliens like interdimensionals? You have a lot of people claiming to have contact with aliens and talk about aliens. Of course, you have people who are baloney and telling half-truths or lies. But in general, the whole world is reporting aliens and contact with aliens. And my question is, why is the media only so interesting in the abduction cases? I think because there's more and more proof of it, because maybe that's the answer, but also, is there a possibility that when they're going to tell the public they are there, maybe it's a good reason for it only to talk about the grays, because if they are so-called gods or so-called created us or whatever, the missing link from ape to man, then it's easy to explain. But when you talk about other type of aliens, then you have a difficulty.
The press has a problem here because they are ignorant.
That's
I know of
very,
very few media people who have done any studying, although I have found a couple here in Amsterdam, believe it or not, which was very nice to know. I think the problem here is the story is too big for the press. We need specialists. We've got specialists on soccer, on baseball, on gardening, you name it. But we don't have media specialists in general about flying saucers.
No.
It's a difficult subject. There's an awful lot of information. You need to be able to sort out the good stuff from the bad.
Yeah.
I think the press takes an easy way out, just like this new movie, Independence Day. It's really a
Have you seen it?
No, I've only seen scenes from it. But I know that they set a new record, $11 million, the first day released in box office receipts. Previous was 3.5. That's a big difference.
Yes.
But it's really a great B movie, fancily done. Alien invaders are going to destroy us. We're going to fight back and defeat them.
Yes, and together, just like the Russians and the Chinese,
Yeah.
and
I mean-
united, and then we have a world government, and we are all happy.
Yeah,
But
that's
is this-
about as simplistic as you can get.
Is that
But it
true?
also paints a picture of alien invaders,
Yes.
bad guys, shoot first, ask questions later, a typical American response.
Yes,
You know,
yes, I know.
So this year is going to be the year of the aliens. Both Newsweek and Time in the United States have cover stories this week
I think
about these movies and what's coming up.
I think the alien presence is the only tool to unite the world, I think, because the Muslims, the Islam, the all type of religions, including the Chinese, are maybe the structures, the power structures, will fall down by this presence. This is the only tool. And then you can say, okay, we have to unite. And then when it is happening, I think it's dangerous to say, hallelujah, this is the answer to do this all. And we have to be critical.
I think we have to be very critical. I don't think this is the magic tool that's going to unite us all. Bosnia certainly indicates, and many other, in Rwanda, Urundi, all the places in the world where people are being killed willy-nilly for religious reasons. I don't think any of those people are going to stop that killing because there are aliens coming here. But maybe we can get the United Nations. Yeah, I think the rest of the countries of the world might realize that it's time that we got our planet in shape.
Yes.
That we started acting like grown-ups instead of like children, spoiled children at that. So I'm an optimist about the future. I think by the end of the millennium, which is also the end of the century,
Yes.
that we will get to the truth and that a new era will begin for mankind, and
Yes.
as earthlings, recognizing that there's a power structure outside of ourselves,
Yes.
and that maybe we ought to see ourselves as others see us, as this primitive society, which has potential but hasn't reached it yet. And maybe our kids will move forward. I'm an optimist, that's what I hope.
Okay, thank you very much for talking about the subject here in Holland. And I hope in October that you...
November.
Goes well. That's November, yes. There's also a huge conference in November in Krasnopolski. When people want to see Stanton in Krasnopolski, they can call us, Mister, and we will. You can meet them again. So,
I'm looking forward to it.
and there will be a huge conference in Krasnopolski in November. Okay, nice having you here.
Pleasure.
Wish you all the best, and hoping to see you more of you. Okay.